Howdy, folks, and welcome to Saddle and Sixskin. Are you ready to ride the dusty trails of history with us? Today, we're going to spin a yarn that'll warm your heart and remind you of the grit and grace of the Old West. It's a tale of hardship, kindness, and the unexpected bonds that can blossom in the face of adversity. This story is a bit longer than usual, but it is a great story. We're talking about the kind of story that sticks with you, the kind your grandpa used to tell around the campfire. So, settle in, pour yourself a cup of coffee, and let's head back to the Wyoming Territory of 1878. And while you're at it, why not give us a like, or maybe even subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin? We've got plenty more stories like this one heading your way. Our story begins with Jackson Garrison, a man barely past 30, standing in his tiny cabin. The wind is howling, something fierce, rattling the windows like a restless spirit. He is cradling his 3-month-old daughter, Emma. Can you imagine him? He's desperate to soothe her hungry cries. See, just 2 weeks prior, he buried his wife, Sarah, and nothing in his life had prepared him for this kind of desolate loneliness, nothing at all. And there's a terrifying responsibility of raising a child alone in that harsh Wyoming territory, huh? It's a story of tough times, and we hope you will like or subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. Jackson whispers to his little girl, his voice raspy from lack of sleep. "Shoo, little one, shoo. I know you're hungry. I know." He paces the creaking floorboards, the kerosene lamp casts long shadows across the sparse furnishings. There's a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a small stove, and the bed where Sarah took her last breath after childbirth complications finally got the best of her weakened body. See, Sarah was a strong woman, but sometimes, the West just takes what it wants. Now, little Emma's cries only got louder. Jackson tried everything: goat's milk from his neighbor's farm, diluted with water, just like the doctor told him. He even tried sugar water, which sometimes soothed her. He rocked her for hours on end, and nothing seemed to work. The poor little thing was starving, and Jackson felt like he was failing her. He couldn't help her, and that feeling is hard to shake. The last of the milk had soured that morning, and the nearest general store was in town, 10 miles away. A daunting distance, especially considering the snowstorm that had blown in and made travel impossible. Now, the pantry, it only held coffee, flour, and a few dried beans, nothing that could sustain a baby. Jackson felt the crushing weight of helplessness pressing down on him as Emma's tiny fists beat against his chest. It was a moment of pure desperation, the kind that tests a man's soul. "Sarah," he whispered, looking up at the ceiling as if his wife might hear him from beyond. "I don't know what to do." Just as he spoke those words, a knock came at the door, so faint that at first Jackson thought it was just another gust of wind. But then it came again, more insistent this time. Shifting Emma to one arm, he approached cautiously. Visitors were rare, especially in this weather, you know? His free hand moved instinctively to the revolver on his hip as he called out, "Who's there?" A woman's voice trembled with cold. "Mr. Garrison? It's Lillian Harlow from the Henderson place down the valley. I've brought some things for the baby." Jackson hesitated only a moment before unlatching the door. The wind immediately forced it wider, bringing with it a swirl of snow and a petite figure bundled in a heavy coat, scarf, and hat. "This is Lillian, remember the name, and it's the type of meeting that can change the course of a life, forever." In her arms was a large covered basket. "Miss Harlow," Jackson stepped back, bewildered. He recognized her vaguely. She was the school teacher who'd arrived from Boston last autumn. They'd exchanged nods in town, perhaps twice, but nothing more. "I heard about your situation," she said, unwinding her scarf to reveal a young face, probably no more than 22. Her face was decorated with earnest brown eyes and wind-chapped cheeks. "Mrs. Peterson mentioned you had no way to feed the baby, and I brought milk, some bread, and other provisions." She looked down at Emma, whose cries had momentarily paused at the sight of this newcomer. Jackson stared at her, then at the basket. He was just at a loss for words. Emma began to cry again, and Lillian stepped forward without hesitation. "May I?" she asked, nodding toward the baby. Before Jackson could respond, she had set down her basket and taken Emma into her arms with practiced ease. "There now, little one," she murmured, her voice taking on a gentle cadence. "Your father's going to warm some milk for you right away, isn't he?" She looked expectantly at Jackson, who suddenly remembered himself and moved to the basket. Inside, he found a ceramic bottle of milk, several cloth diapers, a jar of applesauce, loaves of fresh bread, and other foodstuffs. "The milk is still warm," Lillian said. "I heated stones and wrapped them around the bottle for the journey. It should be perfect temperature now." Jackson fumbled with the bottle, unscrewing the cap with hands that suddenly felt too large, too clumsy. "Now, ain't that just like a man sometimes?" When he offered it to Lillian, she expertly positioned Emma and guided the rubber nipple to her mouth. The baby's cries ceased immediately as she began to suckle. "Thank you," Jackson managed finally, his voice thick. "I don't know how to." "You don't need to thank me," Lillian said softly, her eyes on Emma. "No child should go hungry, and no parent should face such trials alone. This part of our video, it's a good spot for you to like or subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. If you are enjoying the yarn." Jackson watched this stranger soothe his daughter with such natural grace that his chest tightened with emotion. He hadn't realized how exhausted he was until that moment when someone else had temporarily lifted his burden. "The storm's getting worse," he observed, glancing toward the window where snow was now piling against the glass. "You can't make it back to the Henderson place tonight." Lillian bit her lip, looking up from Emma. "I hadn't planned to stay, but you'll have to," Jackson said firmly. "I'd be sending you to your death otherwise, and I suspect Mrs. Peterson would never forgive me." A small smile touched Lillian's lips. "Mrs. Peterson has strong opinions about most things that she does." Jackson found himself returning the smile, the first time his face had formed such an expression since Sarah's passing. "You can take the bed. Emma and I will manage by the fire." "Nonsense," Lillian replied. "Emma needs proper rest in a proper bed, and so do you. I'll be fine here by the fire." Jackson wanted to argue, but found he lacked the energy. Instead, he set about building up the fire, grateful for the company, for the help, for the simple kindness of this woman who had braved a blizzard to bring food to a stranger and his hungry child. That night, for the first time in 2 weeks, Jackson slept deeply, knowing his daughter's needs were met, and that, at least for now, they were not alone. He couldn't believe his luck, she was his angel. The next morning, Jackson awoke disoriented. Sunlight streamed through the frosted-edged windows, and the cabin was warm. For a moment, he thought Sarah was still alive, that her death had been just another terrible nightmare. Then, reality crashed back as he jerked upright, looking frantically for Emma. He found his daughter cooing softly in Lillian's arms as the young woman sat in the rocking chair singing a gentle lullaby. The sight was so unexpected, so domestic, that Jackson froze, one foot on the floor. "Good morning," Lillian said quietly. "I hope you don't mind. She was fussing, and I didn't want to wake you." Jackson ran a hand through his tousled dark hair. "No, I don't mind. What time is it?" "Nearly 8. You've slept almost 12 hours. Shame flooded him. 12 hours. He never got that much rest. "I'm sorry. I should have missed her." "Mr. Garrison," Lillian interrupted gently. "You needed the rest. No apologies necessary." She stood, bringing Emma to him. The baby was clean, wearing a fresh diaper, and smelled faintly of lavender. Jackson took his daughter, marveling at how content she seemed. "I've bathed her and fed her twice," Lillian explained. "There's coffee on the stove and breakfast nearly ready." Jackson looked around the cabin with new eyes. The floor had been swept, dishes washed, and somehow the small space seemed less oppressive than it had the night before. This is the perfect time to like or subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin if you haven't already. We really appreciate it. Miss Harlow, Lillian, please, Lillian, he amended. I don't know how to thank you for all this. She brushed a strand of chestnut hair from her face. As I said last night, no thanks needed. Now, the storm has passed, and I've seen your livestock in the barn. They need tending. I'll watch Emma while you see to them. Jackson hesitated, unused to sharing responsibility for his daughter, unused to anyone giving him directions in his own home. But Lillian's practical manner made it difficult to object. He handed Emma back to her and went to pull on his boots and coat. Outside, the world was transformed into a crystalline landscape. A foot of fresh snow blanketed everything, and the morning sun set it all ablaze with diamond light. Jackson trudged to the barn, where his 2 horses, milk cow, and small flock of chickens greeted him eagerly. As he went about his chores, Jackson found his thoughts returning to Lillian. Her unexpected arrival felt like divine intervention. He wasn't a particularly religious man, but he couldn't help wondering if Sarah had somehow arranged this from beyond. When he returned to the cabin, stamping snow from his boots, the aroma of frying bacon and fresh coffee enveloped him. Lillian had set the table and was just placing a plate of Johnny cakes beside the skillet. Perfect timing, she said, looking up with a smile. Emma lay contentedly in a makeshift nest of blankets nearby. You gotta admit, this is one fine Western story. They ate breakfast together, and Jackson found himself telling Lillian about his life, how he'd come west from Pennsylvania after the war. He homesteaded this land 5 years ago, met and married Sarah 3 years later. He told her about their hopes for a family, about Sarah's difficult pregnancy, and finally about the birth that had brought Emma into the world and taken her mother out of it. The doctor came too late, Jackson said, staring into his coffee. By then, she'd lost too much blood. He just wanted her back. She held Emma once before. He couldn't finish. Lillian reached across the table and placed her hand over his. I'm so sorry, Jackson. Her touch was warm, comforting. Jackson looked at their hands together on the rough wooden table and felt something unfamiliar stir within him. Not quite guilt, not quite hope, but something in between. What about you? He asked, gently withdrawing his hand. How does a Boston school teacher end up in Wyoming territory? Lillian's expression changed subtly. I came west for the same reason many do, a fresh start. Running from something, he met his gaze steadily. In a manner of speaking. My fiancé ended our engagement rather publicly. It became difficult to continue teaching in Boston with all the gossip. His loss, Jackson said simply. A blush colored Lillian's cheeks. That's kind of you to say. She rose and began clearing the dishes. The snow has stopped. I should return to the Hendersons before they worry. Jackson stood as well. I'll hitch up the sleigh and take you. A true gentleman. That's not necessary. It is, he insisted. And I'd like Emma to get a checkup from Doc Williams in town. If he's available, we can make a day of it. Lillian hesitated, then nodded. Very well. Let me help you prepare Emma for the journey. Together they bundled the baby in layers of blankets. Jackson marveled at how efficient Lillian was, how she anticipated his needs before he voiced them. By the time they were ready to depart, he found himself reluctant to see this interlude end. The sleigh ride to town was peaceful, the landscape pristine under its blanket of snow. Emma slept nestled between them, and conversation flowed easily. Jackson learned that Lillian had been teaching at the one-room schoolhouse since September, boarding with the Hendersons while saving money to establish her own place. You ever regret coming west? He asked as they crested a hill overlooking the small settlement of Pine Tree Junction. Lillian gazed at the town below, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the stage route, smoke rising from chimneys into the clear blue sky. Not once, she said firmly. Out here, people judge you by your actions, not your past or your family name. What a great story. In town, Jackson left Lillian at the general store while he took Emma to see Doc Williams. The physician proclaimed the baby healthy but underweight. She needs consistent feeding, Jackson, the doctor advised. Goat's milk is fine, but she needs more than that. Have you considered hiring a wet nurse? Jackson shook his head. There's no one nearby who's nursing. Well, then you need to ensure she gets regular feedings of milk with a bit of sugar and perhaps some mashed egg yolk for strength. The doctor eyed him critically. And you need rest yourself. You look half dead. I had help last night, Jackson admitted. The school teacher, Miss Harlow, brought provisions during the storm. Doc Williams' eyebrows rose. Did she now? Interesting. Jackson frowned. What's that supposed to mean? The doctor shrugged. Nothing at all. Just noting that Miss Harlow is well regarded in town. She's good with children, educated, and quite pretty. Sarah would approve, I think. It's not like that, Jackson protested, feeling his neck grow warm. She was just being neighborly. Of course, Doc Williams replied, not bothering to hide his skepticism. Just neighborly. When Jackson met Lillian at the general store, she had assembled a substantial collection of supplies: milk, sugar, coffee, flour, and various other necessities. Put it on my account, Jackson told the shopkeeper. Already settled, the man replied with a meaningful look at Lillian. Jackson confronted her. You shouldn't have paid for those things. Consider it a gift, Lillian said firmly. For Emma. I can provide for my daughter, Jackson insisted, his pride stinging. Lillian's expression softened. I know you can, but there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered freely. Hope you love our story. Before Jackson could respond, Mrs. Peterson bustled up to them, her round face alight with curiosity. Miss Harlow, Mr. Garrison, what a surprise to see you two together. Her gaze dropped to Emma, then bounced between the adults. And how are you managing, Mr. Garrison? Fine, thank you, Jackson replied stiffly. Miss Harlow kindly brought provisions during yesterday's storm. Mrs. Peterson continued as if he hadn't spoken. I told her about your situation. Terrible thing losing your wife so young, and with a newborn. Providence must have sent our dear teacher to you. Lillian cleared her throat. Mrs. Peterson, you're embarrassing Mr. Garrison. Nonsense. It's wonderful to see the community pulling together. And if something more should develop, she winked broadly. Mrs. Peterson. Lillian exclaimed, her cheeks flaming. Jackson shifted uncomfortably. We should be heading back. The day grows short. Of course, Mrs. Peterson said, patting Lillian's arm. But do keep me informed, dear. As they walked back to the sleigh, Jackson muttered, sorry about that. Small towns and their gossip. I'm well acquainted with gossip, Lillian replied dryly. Though I'd hope to escape it by coming west. Some things are universal, I suppose. Jackson helped her into the sleigh, then carefully handed Emma up to her before loading their purchases. The return journey was quieter, both of them lost in thought. When they reached the Henderson farm, Jackson pulled the sleigh to a stop outside the modest two-story house. Thank you for everything, he said as Lillian prepared to disembark. I don't know what Emma and I would have done without your help. Lillian hesitated, then said, Mr. Garrison, Jackson, I'd be happy to check on you and Emma from time to time, if you'd allow it. Relief, and something warmer, flooded through him. We'd welcome your visits anytime. She smiled. In that moment, Jackson felt something shift inside him, a tiny spark igniting where he thought only cold ashes remained. That's where this portion of the video ends, but don't forget to like or subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. We will have the second portion up within a day. If you enjoy this video, you'll like or subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. The following weeks established a pattern. 3 times a week, Lillian would visit after school hours, bringing small treats or necessities, and spending time with Emma. Jackson found himself watching the clock on those days, anticipating her arrival with an eagerness that both comforted and disturbed him. Emma thrived under their combined care. She gained weight, began to coo and smile, and showed increasing interest in the world around her. Jackson caught himself wondering more than once what Sarah would think of this arrangement, of this woman who had so seamlessly stepped into their lives. The Old West, it could be a tough place. One evening in late February, as Lillian read aloud from a book of poetry while Emma slept nearby, Jackson studied her profile in the firelight. Her features were delicate but strong, her manner both gentle and determined. In the weeks he'd known her, he'd never once heard her complain about the harsh conditions or long hours she endured. "You're staring," Lillian observed without looking up from her book. Jackson smiled. "Just thinking about how different things would be if you hadn't knocked on my door that night." Lillian closed the book and met his gaze. "I've often thought the same." "Why did you come, really?" Jackson asked. "It wasn't just because Mrs. Peterson mentioned we needed help. That storm was dangerous." Lillian was silent for a long moment. "I lost my mother when I was very young," she finally said. "My father raised me alone. He did his best, but there were times when what we needed most was the kind of help that neighbors should provide. Too often, it didn't come." She looked at Emma's sleeping form. "When I heard about your situation, I couldn't bear the thought of history repeating itself." Jackson reached across the space between them and took her hand. "Thank you for breaking that cycle." Their eyes held, and Jackson felt the air between them change, charged with unspoken possibilities. Lillian gently withdrew her hand and stood. "It's getting late. I should return to the Hendersons." Jackson nodded, unwilling to press whatever had just passed between them. "I'll hitch up the sleigh." As winter gradually yielded to spring, Jackson's feelings for Lillian deepened. He found himself sharing confidences with her that he'd never voiced to anyone, not even Sarah. Lillian, in turn, told him about her life in Boston, her passion for teaching, and her dreams of someday starting a school of her own in the West. "I want to create a place where children, especially girls, can receive a proper education regardless of their circumstances," she explained one mild April evening as they sat on the porch, Emma babbling happily in Jackson's lap. "Out here, too many children miss schooling because they're needed for farm work, or because the distances are too great." "It's a worthy dream," Jackson said. "This territory needs more people with vision." Lillian smiled. "And what about your dreams, Jackson? What do you want for your future?" He looked down at Emma, now 6 months old and reaching for everything within her grasp. "For a long time after Sarah died, I couldn't see any future at all. Just endless days of survival." He met Lillian's gaze. "That's changed now." The implication hung in the air between them. Lillian's cheeks colored slightly, but she didn't look away. "Lillian." "Miss Harlow." A voice called from the road. They both turned to see a boy of about 12 riding up on a lathered horse. "Tommy Fletcher," Lillian said, rising. "What's wrong?" "Ma sent me to fetch you," the boy gasped. "Pa had an accident with the plow, his legs all tore up. Doc Williams is there, but Ma's beside herself with the little ones." Jackson was already on his feet. "I'll saddle my horse and ride with you." "No," Lillian said quickly. "You need to stay with Emma." "I'll go. Martha Fletcher needs help with her children while the doctor tends to Robert. I'll be fine." Before he could protest further, she had gathered her things and was following Tommy to where her own horse was tethered. Jackson watched them ride away, Emma squirming in his arms, an unsettled feeling in his gut. "This is a fine story we got here." The next day brought news that Robert Fletcher's leg was badly mangled and might require amputation. Lillian sent word that she would be staying with the family for a few days to help Martha manage the children and household. Those days stretched into a week, and Jackson found himself increasingly restless. He missed Lillian's presence, her laughter, the way she sang to Emma while preparing dinner. The cabin, which had begun to feel like a home again, now seemed empty despite Emma's constant demands for attention. "Your father's a fool," he told his daughter as he bounced her on his knee. "A prideful, stubborn fool who's waited too long to speak his heart." Emma gurgled in response, drooling on his shirt. But still she liked hearing her father's voice. When Lillian finally returned, Jackson was splitting wood in the yard. He saw her riding up the path and set down his axe, wiping sweat from his brow. She looked tired but smiled when she saw him. "How is Robert Fletcher?" he asked as he helped her dismount. "Improving. Doc Williams thinks he'll keep the leg, though he'll have a significant limp." Lillian stretched, working out the stiffness from her ride. "Martha's sister has arrived from Cheyenne to help, so I'm no longer needed." "We've missed you," Jackson said simply. Lillian's eyes softened. "I've missed you both as well." The two are beginning to fall in love with each other. He took her satchel and followed her to the cabin inside. She immediately went to Emma, lifting the baby who squealed in delight at seeing her. Jackson watched them together, his heart full. "Lillian," he began, "there's something I need to say." She looked up, Emma settled on her hip. "Yes?" Jackson took a deep breath. "These past months, you've become essential to us, to Emma, certainly, but to me as well. I know it hasn't been long since Sarah passed, and perhaps it's too soon to speak of such things, but I find myself thinking of you constantly when you're not here." Lillian's expression was unreadable. "Jackson, please let me finish." He stepped closer. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I just want you to know that my feelings for you have grown beyond friendship or gratitude. If there's any chance you might someday feel the same, I already do." Lillian interrupted softly. "I have for some time." Jackson's heart leaped. "Then why?" "Because of Sarah," Lillian said. "Because of Emma. Because I didn't want to be seen as taking advantage of your vulnerability, or replacing Emma's mother." "No one could replace Sarah," Jackson said gently. "But that doesn't mean there isn't room in our lives and our hearts for you." Lillian's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Are you certain this isn't just gratitude, or convenience?" Jackson closed the distance between them, careful of Emma, who watched them with curious eyes. "I'm certain what I feel for you is real, and growing stronger every day." Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Jackson leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative at first, then deepening as Lillian responded. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "Well," Lillian said with a shaky laugh, "that answers that question." Jackson smiled, touching his forehead to hers. "Indeed, it does." Their courtship progressed steadily through the spring and into summer. Lillian continued teaching at the schoolhouse, but she spent most evenings and weekends at Jackson's farm. Together, they expanded the garden, repaired the cabin roof, and discussed plans for the future. The townspeople watched with approval. Even Mrs. Peterson, notorious gossip that she was, could find nothing to criticize in their relationship. She had done enough gossiping to fill the next 10 years. "It's like a story from one of those dime novels," she told anyone who would listen. "Handsome widower with a baby rescued by the pretty school teacher. Providence, I tell you." By August, when Emma took her first tottering steps across the cabin floor, falling into Lillian's waiting arms with a peal of laughter, Jackson knew it was time to formalize what they all felt. Now this is a story. That evening, after Emma was asleep, he took Lillian's hand and led her out to the porch where they often sat to watch the sunset. The sky was ablaze with color crimson and gold stretching across the western horizon, the first stars appearing in the deepening blue above. "It's beautiful," Lillian murmured, leaning against the porch railing. "Yes, you are," Jackson replied, earning a playful swat on his arm. "Flatterer." Honest man, he corrected, taking both her hands in his. Lillian, when you knocked on my door that snowy night, I was at the lowest point of my life. I didn't know how Emma and I would survive, let alone find joy again. He could not find the right words to describe his feelings. Lillian squeezed his hands, but remained silent, her eyes fixed on his face. You changed everything, Jackson continued. Not just by bringing food or helping with Emma, but by showing me that life continues, that love can bloom even in the harshest conditions. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. I'm not a wealthy man, and I can't offer you grand adventures or fine things, but I can promise to love you faithfully for all my days. He opened the pouch and tipped a simple gold band with a small pearl into his palm. This was my grandmother's. I'd be honored if you would wear it as my wife. Tears spilled down Lillian's cheeks. Jackson Garrison, are you asking me to marry you? I am, he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. Will you, Lillian Harlow, make our family complete? Will you be Emma's mother, and my wife? Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, with all my heart. Jackson slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her close, sealing their promise with a kiss that held all the hope and love he'd once thought lost forever. They were married in the small church in Pine Tree Junction 2 weeks later. Emma, now crawling everywhere and beginning to form words, watched from Mrs. Peterson's lap as her father and the woman who had saved them both exchanged vows. That evening, as they stood on the porch of their cabin, now truly a home, Jackson wrapped his arms around his wife and looked up at the stars. Thank you, he murmured against her hair. For what? Lillian asked, leaning back against his chest. For knocking on my door, for being brave enough to venture out in a blizzard to help a stranger. Lillian turned in his arms, her face tilted up to his. It wasn't bravery, it was necessity. No one should face their darkest hours alone. Well, thanks to you, neither of us will have to again. Jackson kissed her tenderly. Though I must warn you, Emma will be walking properly any day now, and I suspect she'll be as headstrong as her mother. Which one? Lillian asked with a smile. Both, Jackson laughed. Heaven help us all. Inside, Emma's soft babbling through the open window reminded them of their blessings. Life in the Wyoming Territory was never easy, but Jackson knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The family forged not by blood, but by love, compassion, and a simple knock on the door one snowy night when hope seemed lost. This is a love story. As the years passed, their family grew. A son joined them 2 years after their marriage, then another daughter 2 years after that. The cabin expanded into a proper farmhouse, and Lillian eventually realized her dream of opening a school that served children from across the county. Through it all, they kept the memory of Sarah alive for Emma, ensuring she knew the mother who had given her life. And each winter on the anniversary of that fateful night when Lillian had arrived with her basket of food, they made a point of helping another family in need, paying forward the kindness that had brought them together and changed their lives forever. We hope you have a wonderful day. Folks, that's our story for today. A reminder that even in the darkest of times, a little bit of kindness can make all the difference. It is a simple thing. Remember this story the next time somebody you know is struggling. What is the lesson? Remember, here at Saddle and Sixskin, we love to share these stories from the Old West with you all. It's the kind of history that reminds us of the values that built this nation. If you enjoyed this tale of love, loss, and redemption, be sure to like and subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin for more stories from the Wild West. We would love to see more subscriptions. It is always great.